Hello Internet Land, this is The Brain, Mother Brain, and I'm here today to talk to you about the latest 007 film, Skyfall. This is the third entry in the Daniel Craig series of James Bond films that goes as far back as 2006 with the release of Casino Royale, the very film that rebooted the entire James Bond franchise. Now, this is coming from a guy who grew up in the Pierce Brosnan era from 1995 to 2002. That's when I got my crash course in the James Bond franchise, and before that there was my little fan phase of James Bond Jr. when I was a small kid, watching that in syndication every morning. The video game everybody remembers for the N64 came out, and I was already familiar with all the characters and all the villains simply because I went back during that time and watched all the Bond films from Dr. No all the way up to License to Kill through the special box sets that MGM had put out during the time GoldenEye was released. So of course when Daniel Craig had taken over the role in 2005, I gotta admit I was not a Daniel Craig fan. Why a guy with blonde hair who looks like Ed O'Neill and clearly does not look like the kind of guy you want to put in that tux. Casino Royale defied all expectations at the time of its release and showed a different kind of James Bond than we were used to previously. This was a Bond that was clearly the vision of Ian Fleming, a Bond who was a brute and an alcoholic and a guy who could potentially die if he made the wrong mistakes, unlike the previous Bonds who were more portrayed as superheroes, especially in the Roger Moore era. So in the famous Bond teaser that we're all used to in the franchise, this one in particular has Bond going after a terrorist who has a list of all the MI6 agents that are located around the world. And Bond is being assisted by Eve, played by Naomi Harris, who's another MI6 agent. Bond fights this guy on a train, and Eve, with her sniper rifle, is forced to take a shot, which could mean hitting Bond. And M, back at MI6, makes the call for the shot to be taken. And of course, Bond gets shot, goes down, hits the water. But as we all know, Bond survives. But it's not like You Only Live Twice, where the whole thing was a hoax for MI6. No, Bond has retired from MI6 in an effort to get away from all the killings that he's been used to doing and the lifestyle that he lives. That's until cyber terrorist attacks take place in MI6, literally blowing apart part of the building and a number of agents getting killed. And Bond, as a result, comes out of retirement to get back in action to find out what's going on. And unfortunately, Bond is not the same guy he once was. He's lost his step, as we find out through a training and psychological exercise that he has to take in order to get back onto the surface as an agent. And a number of things go on in the film that ultimately impact his relationships with M and with MI6. Once again, Daniel Craig, I think really this time defines himself in the role of James Bond. Unlike the coolness of Connery or the charm of Moore or the sort of breakneck pace that Pierce Brosnan was used to in his films, this is a more well-measured, more real James Bond. And as we all know, Daniel Craig really does go for a more grittier tone with the character. But the real story of the film is the relationship with Bond and M, once again played by Judi Dench. And while there have been a number of entries where the relationship was clearly almost antagonistic in ways, I think this film really shows not only the best of Judi Dench's performance as M, but it really goes into how deep and how complicated their relationship is as employer and employee. So finally, and I'm so happy for this, that we now have Q back in the fold. This time played by an actor by the name of Ben Whishaw. He's a younger version of Q, almost like a Mark Zuckerberg type with the British accent. And interestingly enough, there's no real gadgets in this movie. Bond is once again equipped with his classic Walter PPK, which is only usable by him through his fingerprints. A good nod to License to Kill with the sniper rifle that was aligned with his fingerprints in that film. And a little walkie-talkie that almost looks like the radio transmitter from Dick Tracy. That's it. And they kind of make a joke about, oh, we're no longer in the days of exploding pens anymore. And I kind of like that. You know, it's not only going back to Dr. No, where the gun was the only real gadget, but it also sort of goes back to this idea of, let's not go crazy with all the fantastical gadgets and make this into a fantasy of the Roger Moore, Pierce Brosnan era. The locations, also incredible. Most of the film does take place in China, particularly in Shanghai. So this is actually new territory for the Daniel Craig series. But I was also kind of happy that they sort of had a lot more action going on in London, which the previous Bond films really had not done, because it was always about going to the most fantastical locations possible. And of course, no Bond film is complete without the villains. And let me tell you something, Javier Bardem as Silva. This character is undoubtedly a combination of Goldfinger and Max Zorin, the Christopher Walken character from A View to a Kill, and a number of other crazed Bond villains. In fact, I would say he's closer to what Heath Ledger's Joker was in A Dark Knight. This is a guy who at one point was an MI6 agent but got betrayed by M and the MI6 and winds up doing cyber terrorist attacks as an effort to get revenge. But I also have to agree with some of my colleagues who believe that the biggest flaw with the character was his lack of motivation for his premise in trying to attack MI6. But Javier Bardem really just makes up for all those problems and all those flaws, and does some things in that film that we've never seen in a Bond movie before, and really does harken back to those classic Bond villains, which this franchise has been missing as early as Casino Royale. I don't think he's going to get an Oscar for it. You know, there's been a lot of talk about this Bond film being an Oscar-worthy Bond film, but I don't see that here. I see this as undoubtedly the best this franchise has seen in a long time. Naomi Harris playing Eve, who is a very different kind of Bond girl. She's one who is a total badass and not a desk jockey, but someone who you could almost say is Bond's equivalent, and very difficult for Bond to get intimate with. And when you do see the film, there's a little nice payoff that that character has that I think, when I saw that, I was like, yes, it all makes sense. You have the direction of Sam Mendes, the famous director of American Beauty, as well as other classics as Road to Perdition, Jarhead, and Revolutionary Road. And this is a guy who you know is in love with the James Bond films. So much so that he has implemented a number of key moments and little nods to the previous films and basically squashed them all into this one movie, which is very timely for Bond's 50th anniversary on the big screen. Everything from alligator pits, replaced now with Komodo dragons, to fights on trains. That is all I am going to tell you about Skyfall. I give this film 3.5 stars. And I only give it 3.5 only because I still have my love for the earlier films, and there's still aspects about those movies that I miss. But as a fan, I am now sold on Daniel Craig. I thought this was the best film in his franchise, although many may argue that Casino was the better film. But I think in terms of bringing back some of the humor, bringing back the characters that we remember, and having a memorable villain all made up for the sort of lack of dissatisfaction that I had with both Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace. That is it for now, and that's my review on Skyfall, which is in theaters right now. It's in regular theaters and also in IMAX. I definitely recommend that you go see it in IMAX as soon as possible. And you can check us out at Coast Blog, and you could also follow me on Twitter. And I will be back with more great reviews and hopefully maybe even more Bond films.